Okay, let's unpack this because we've got some really fascinating stuff today.
We certainly do. We're diving into quite a rich historical piece interview with Emeka Ojukwu. Now, for anyone interested in Nigerian history, that name, well, it immediately signals a really pivotal time.
Absolutely.
And this interview, it comes from a pretty well-regarded online news source, big readership.
And just to set the scene, that period, say 1966 to 1970, Ojukwu's influence was immense. What makes this interview so valuable is getting his viewpoint directly, looking back years after the Nigerian Civil War. And that's where it gets interesting, seeing how his views maybe changed or perhaps stayed pretty consistent.
Exactly. So our goal with this deep dive is really to unpack what Ojukwu was saying in this specific interview. We'll look at his take on the Nigerian state, the whole Biafra question, leadership, his own legacy, and crucially, how relevant does all that feel today?
Right then, let's jump in. Back in 1969, Ojukwu wasn't exactly mincing words about Nigeria. He called the Federation corrupt, unprogressive, oppressive, even irreformable, compared it to the Ottoman Empire. Strong stuff.
Very strong. And the interviewer, decades later, asked him straight up, do you still believe that?
And his answer.
Regretfully, they haven't changed. The worst thing about Nigeria is that here is a nation that has so much potential. But the only problem is that everybody seems really to bury one's head in the sands and not face the problems or the realities of the Nigerian situation. The Nigerian Federation, there's no way. We all went to school. There's absolutely no way you can look at it the way it was conceived and say it was a good federation. One of the federating units was bigger than the others. So that is one. The other is that everything that has worked in Nigeria appears to have worked. That would seem very much to have been an imposition. The idea that sovereignty belongs to the Nigerian people is all fiction as far as Nigeria is concerned. I was talking to somebody earlier on today, and I said one of the problems we have is that we refuse to define, and yet Nigeria is one place because of the many, many disparate units in the country. And the need to work together imposes on us this need to define every step of our being so that everybody knows its rights.
It was a regretful yes, basically. He sounded quite disappointed, feeling Nigeria's huge potential was just buried. He put it down to a refusal to face the hard truths.
What were those truths, in his view?
Well, a key one for him was the structure itself. He argued the Federation was flawed right from the start, mainly because one part was just so much bigger than the others. An inherent imbalance, he called it.
Right, that regional imbalance. He went further, too, didn't he? Suggesting that real sovereignty wasn't actually with the Nigerian people.
Yes, more like an ideal, perhaps, than a lived reality. And he felt progress often seemed like something forced from above, not bubbling up organically.
Imposed rather than homegrown.
Exactly. And this connects to his point about national identity, or the lack of a clear definition. He found it strange, that questioning the very basis of the Union was often discouraged.
Yeah, he contrasted that with the U.S. constantly aiming for a more perfect union.
Precisely. Like, why couldn't Nigeria openly debate its own foundations?
I don't know why anybody, if America says to you today that they're proud of the fact that for 200 years they have been trying to make their union more perfect. And that sounds very reasonable. Now in Nigeria, you're not allowed even to question your union, which is ridiculous. If even the Nigerians at a certain date, say 10 years ago, thought one way, what right have we got to think that new thoughts, new brains haven't emerged that can work out something different?
He saw the fear around a national conference, the idea it would automatically mean breakup as a sign of this immaturity.
And he had some pretty pointed things to say about resource control, too.
Oh, absolutely. He was quite firm on that. Advocating for regional ownership, then negotiation within the Federation. He questioned the logic why nationalize oil found in one place, but land, say, up north, another natural resource, stays regional.
It does make you stop and think about the consistency there, doesn't it?
It does. And his critique extended to how democracy was working, or maybe not working at the time. He talked about how hard it was just to register parties and the limits on what they could even stand for. Like his example of a Christian Democratic Union being potentially banned.
Right, suggesting limitations on free political expression.
Exactly. He kept calling for a more mature approach, treat Nigerians like adults who can talk about their future.
This idea of considering a national conference, an idea only put out to make Nigeria break up. It's one of the most ridiculous concepts Nigerians have.
And the 36 states. He wasn't convinced.
No, he questioned if they were really about economic progress or maybe more. Well, he used the term punitive creations, perhaps about managing power rather than development.
Interesting phrasing. So underlying all this was a desire for just an open conversation.
Seems so. A genuine discussion about what kind of Nigeria people actually wanted.
In Nigeria, you say you have a democracy. You don't allow parties to spring up as parties normally anywhere in the world spring up. What is INEC? Registering a party? Why? No. They can take note of the existence of a party, but they haven't got any executive right over its functions. There is nothing wrong with me personally setting up a party purely for the interest of the people of Umudim in Nnewi. I wouldn't win a national sort of mandate, I'm sure. But if I choose to safeguard the rights of a minute group, why shouldn't I? If I choose that my political party should be one that takes care of, protects four-legged animals, why shouldn't I? And so on and so forth. Why can't I go into politics determined that culture is essentially religion, or that religion is essentially culture, determined to protect the culture of our people? Why not?
Okay, so that strong critique of Nigeria sets the stage for talking about Biafra and self-determination, which the interview obviously covered.
Yes, the interviewer brought up Ojukwu's past calls for an IPOB political party where Igbos would be the majority.
And Ojukwu's response? Was he still pushing for that?
His stance was consistent.
The formation of a country where Igbos
the majority.
I have never opposed it. I have never opposed it. If the Igbos feel that things are best for them in a country of their own, why shouldn't they? If, after all we've been going through in Nigeria, we feel that Biafra is best, we have every right to seek to recreate Biafra.
He said he never opposed Igbos having their own country if they felt it was best. He even mentioned, the possibility of recreating Biafra.
But he added something important, didn't he? About the world not being a prison.
Exactly that.
The only thing is, please, let's not make a mistake of thinking that this world actually is a prison. No. You are what you are for as long as it is comfortable for you.
Let's not make a mistake of thinking that this world actually is a prison. His point being, national identity isn't some fixed sentence. People can choose.
Which ties into his background, right? The Pan-Africanist tradition.
It does. He had this broader vision of African unity beyond just one group, but underpinning it all was this core principle, opposing any situation where power leads to people treating others inhumanely. Man becoming beast to man, as he put it.
Powerful words.
Now, with that at the back of my thoughts, you can understand that the only problem that I will not permit, and that is man becoming beast to his fellow man.
The discussion then shifted, moved towards leadership and the future.
Yes, he talked about looking for someone to take the baton, as he said.
And it is clear to me that you don't suddenly wake up one morning and say, "Here, I have found him." It doesn't ever work that way. More than anything else, what I'm trying to say when I say this is to wake up the youth of our society. That power, as far as the way I see it, is not my personal preserve. No. I think that more people should come forward. And when they do, very simply, one day another leader will emerge.
But he stressed that leadership wasn't his personal property. It had to come from the youth.
And he made a point about his own age when he was most active.
He did. He pointed out he was only 33 during those really critical years.
In the context of this, that whatever it is that people admire in what I have done, let them remember also that I did most of them when I was 33. So, I don't want a group of people laid back, always waiting for something to be served them on a platter of gold. Come out, show your hands, struggle, take over the battle. I wouldn't fight you.
It felt like a direct encouragement to younger generations. Don't wait, step up, fight for what you believe in.
The interviewer then mentioned Ralph Ojukwu and this perception that maybe he wasn't getting support, even facing persecution.
Right, persecution allegedly influenced by federal powers acting through state governments.
How did Ojukwu respond to that?
He clarified he had a good relationship with Ojukwu. His interpretation was interesting.
There is absolutely no question of myself or Ralph Ojukwu not being received by me. I like Ralph. We get on very well. Excuse me. We get on very well. He even saw me to the airport when I was leaving. That close are we. Now, when you talk about the establishment, what you find is one of my problems over the Nigerian structure. What the government of Abia or Imo, what positions they've taken about Ralph Ojukwu are not Igbo positions. They're taking and they're reflecting what they imagine would be pleasing to Obasanjo and his government. That's all.
Any opposition Ojukwu faced wasn't necessarily an Igbo position, but more likely regional governments trying to, well, stay on the good side of the federal government. Appeasement, essentially.
I see. That adds a layer of political complexity. Then the conversation took a bit of a darker turn, looking at Nigeria at the time of the interview.
Yes, the interviewer pointed to rising ethnic violence, law and order breaking down, arms imports, and asked directly, is Nigeria becoming a failed state?
A heavy question.
Very. Ojukwu was cautious in his reply. He mentioned the difficulty, especially in Nigeria, of sorting fact from rumor.
It's always difficult to know which is rumor, which is fact. More so in a place like Nigeria. Certainly, it is clear that the forces of law and order have tended to fail the citizenry over the past 2 years. It is equally true that under Obasanjo's government, though called democratic, more people have been killed. Killed for various reasons. That life has not been secure under his government. It is equally true that throughout his government, the 2 years, Nigeria has had ethnic problems. These are factors, I suppose, with which one can judge the success or failure of Obasanjo's government. And it is also factors which would indicate to you that there are underlying problems of Nigeria that need to be looked into, and that if Obasanjo is not looking well into it, then he's not doing his job.
But he did acknowledge the failure of law and order, the insecurity under the government, then which he described rather dismissively as run by a messenger.
He didn't name names, but the implication was clear.
Quite. He saw these things as clear signs of deep underlying problems that needed serious attention, urgently.
This naturally led them to talk about history, specifically revisionist history, and how the 1966-1970 period, with him at the center, was being reinterpreted.
Right. And the interviewer asked, why haven't you been more vocal correcting the record?
What was his reason?
He basically said lack of authority, he wasn't in power. But then, interestingly, he claimed he was probably the most popular politician in the country.
Based on what?
Based on the reception he got from the public when he appeared. He used that as his evidence.
I do not remain silent, no. And I'm happy you asked this question. When you are not vested with authority, it is always difficult to get your voice heard in Nigeria. I say this, and it's not being big-headed, singularly, I'm probably the most popular politician in the country. Proof, I only have to step out on the roads and see what happens. In fact, I amuse myself, and I laugh also by very often finding myself in a position where I introduce the successful one, success in inverted commas, who, side by side with me, waged the struggle. They succeeded. I failed in inverted commas as well. But when we get to Nigeria today, it will be expected of me to introduce them. That is the position.
Okay. But despite that perceived popularity, he was reluctant to write his own big book about the war.
Yes, he prioritized the future. He used this analogy, God gave us two eyes facing forward, not backward.
The other thing which you might be alluding to is this question of writing a book about the war. I must confess that my attitude is slightly different from yours on that matter. I am more preoccupied with our immediate future. When I came back from exile, I was asked something nearly the same as you're now asking. And I said, God is in infinite mercy, gave us two eyes, and both of them are facing forward. He could have given us one eye in front and one behind, but he didn't. All he has done that for, in my view, is always to remind us that the future is more important than the past. And that indeed is my own feeling. The other thing is that generals who have delusions about their own professionalism spend years and miles of paper trying to tell the world how they waged a struggle and would have won it single-handedly. So those who think they're brilliant generals and soldiers, let them write. I am a historian, social scientist. I am more preoccupied with what would happen to this unit called Nigeria tomorrow, the next day, the next day. Whenever I get down pen on paper, and I will be getting there more and more, it will be in an effort to help Nigerians discover themselves, not to glorify a past that really didn't exist.
He didn't want to just refight old battles on paper.
That's quite a different approach from some military figures who focus heavily on their war memoirs.
He made that contrast himself, said his focus was helping Nigerians figure themselves out now, not polishing up a potentially inaccurate past.
So how did he react when specific misinterpretations were put to him, like the war being just about resource control or Biafrans aiming to conquer Lagos?
His reaction sounds almost amused, actually. Dismissive. He called it most unintelligent propaganda left over from the war.
Basically outdated talking points.
Pretty much.
I laugh because it is most unintelligent. These the people who say this sort of thing are people who have remained fixated at a certain point in history. What they are repeating ad nauseum is the propaganda with which they fought a war that ended full 30 years ago. Now, I urge them to wake up and look at the new situation.
He urged focusing on present issues. He even flipped the script on bank looting, suggesting federal officials were the likely culprits there.
Okay, what about after he left Biafra? Did he consider setting up a government in exile?
He said he thought about it, yes, but decided against it.
Why not?
His reasoning was quite pragmatic, actually. He felt it might give him some personal perks, the status of a head of state in exile.
Right, the formalities.
Exactly. But he didn't think it would actually do much for the Igbo people still inside Nigeria, especially given how he viewed the federal government's attitude. It wouldn't materially help them, so he didn't pursue it.
Consider, yes, but I dismissed it.
Why?
Because I didn't see really what good it would do. Oh, it would do me personal good, because some people would still look upon me as a head of state, and there would certainly in certain places be the red carpet receptions. But is that what life is all about? Life is about the betterment of the lot of the millions of our people at home. I had to consider very seriously what possible reaction a government that for 3 years have seen intent on genocide, what possible reaction they would have on such a situation vis-a-vis our people who are still captive within the Nigerian situation.
That leads to another criticism sometimes leveled at him, that after his own exile, he focused on getting his own properties back, but maybe didn't do enough for others.
He addressed that directly, acknowledged he'd always have critics, you can't please everyone, but he maintained he did what he could and was still doing what he could.
I will always have critics, and whatever it is, let them decide. They have every right to their opinion. I am satisfied in my mind that I have done as much as I can, and I am continuing to try to do more to help as many of my compatriots as I can help. What am I supposed to have done? What did I do even for my father's property, my inheritance? I went to court. Good. If I'm going to court for Ndi, I think the very first thing I will have to prove is my locus. I believe that Nigeria's concept about my locus does not permit me to assume certain national responsibilities. And that's just one thing.
He mentioned his own legal fights for his inheritance, but also his advocacy for others, people who lost jobs, retired officers, things like that.
So, defending his record on that front, what about the financing of the war? Was there a concern about thanking supporters properly?
That concern was raised, yeah. The idea that not showing enough appreciation might hurt future support. Ojukwu said they did what they could within their means to show gratitude. He even mentioned thanking Israel just that morning for their support back then.
Interesting detail.
But he also reframed the whole financing idea.
We do what we can in a circumstance that we are in control of. Even this morning, I thanked Israel for whatever help they had given us. I am constantly thanking other people whenever I meet them. I take it upon myself, maintaining the symbolism of Biafra. I thank them.
He suggested it wasn't so much about cash donations, but more about sympathy, about resistance against what they saw as a potential final solution or massacre.
Financing the war, that's an odd concept. Nobody financed any war. What happened was the Nigerians decided that they would like to put a final solution to the Igbo problem.
So, framing it as moral and practical support against perceived genocide, not just funding a war.
Precisely. And he saw the declaration of Biafra itself as creating a haven, a boundary where displaced people could pool resources.
And he had a specific take on the war's origins, too, didn't he? Relating to Gowon.
Yes, he characterized the whole war as fundamentally a resistance against Gowon's coup.
They unleashed a massacre. We tried to contain unleashed a second wave, more vicious than the previous one. I looked upon the situation, did the best I could for our people who were scattered all over Nigeria. I said, okay, this is our boundary. If you can find your way back to within this area, whatever there is in this area will be shared equally amongst all of us. You have as much right here as anybody who happened to be here. That actually is another way of seeing the declaration of Biafra. And they had a goal, an aim in their flight. That is how it came. The other thing to always bear in mind is that we didn't really wage a war. What we did was resist Gowon's coup d'etat. And I hope he will enter the Guinness Book of Records as the person who has waged a coup d'etat longer than anybody else, because the whole 3 years was actually trying to legitimize his coup.
He claimed Gowon then spent the next 3 years trying to legitimize that coup. That's definitely a different angle than the standard narrative.
It certainly is. Shifting gears slightly, the conversation touched on internal Igbo politics specifically, the tendency to label dissent as sabotage.
Right, both during the war and potentially after.
What was Ojukwu's take on that?
He acknowledged that during the war, yes, given the life or death situation, those kinds of labels were used, high stakes. But post-war, he claimed he wasn't really aware of dissenters being systematically called saboteurs. More importantly, he stressed that dissent is just part of democracy. He didn't expect everyone to agree with him.
So he wasn't calling for absolute unity.
No, his vision seemed to be more about an emerging Igbo agenda that a majority would rally around. He used analogies like the diversity within the Jewish National Congress or how close U.S. elections often are. He wanted a stronger, maybe more strident, collective voice, but not necessarily everyone singing the exact same tune.
Okay. There was also a more personal question raised about his marriage to Bianca.
Yes, the interviewer mentioned that some people saw it almost as a reward or compensation for all his sacrifices.
How did he react to that framing?
Very personally, it sounds like.
I can never be compensated enough on this matter. I mean, if indeed the question is my wife, and she is the greatest thing that has happened to me, and that's it. I don't know what I have done to deserve so much compensation, but if you call it a compensation, I dedicate myself much further to the service of Igbo, who in their wisdom give me such compensation.
Filled with appreciation, he called her the greatest thing that has happened to me. He seemed to accept that framing in a way, saying it made him even more dedicated to the people he felt had bestowed this compensation on him. Quite touching, really.
Definitely a personal insight. Then there was this strange story about a supposedly declassified document.
Yes. This alleged 1967 conversation between Ojukwu and Awolowo, supposedly agreeing the East and West would secede together, that was circulating online.
Ojukwu's take.
Complete fabrication, he said. Absolutely baseless. He scoffed at the idea of Nigeria having classified and declassified documents like that back then.
Good point.
And he noted, conveniently, everyone supposedly at this meeting was deceased. No way to verify it.
So, completely debunked from his perspective.
Let's stop fooling ourselves, please. When any Nigerian gets up and says this is classified information that has recently been declassified, classified by who? Declassified by who? Do you think we're in America where you have these things? In Nigeria, nobody classified anything. And nobody has declassified. So once it starts with that, you know there's deception. There's pure deceit.
Yeah, and they said that you were the one that recorded this conversation.
And then I declassified it recently.
I couldn't make the sense of who kept the copy and who declassified.
Precisely.
Yeah. But I know it's circulating all over and people are commenting about it. But there's no way of knowing for me whether this is actually what happened or whether was there any meeting like that. The meeting was supposedly attended by Professor Aloko, Professor Eninjoko, Dr. Wakanma Okokoro, Dr. PNC Okibo, Lieutenant Colonel Imo, Chief J.I. Onye, and many others.
I find it quite amusing also that all the Igbo participants are dead.
That's true. Wow.
How come? Is it the death of Pius Okibo that declassified?
But he did talk about his actual relationship with Awolowo.
Yes. He stood by his account of releasing Awolowo from prison in the East, emphasizing Gowon had no control there at the time.
I released Awolowo from jail. Even that, some people are beginning to contest as well. Awolowo in jail, he was in Calabar. Gowon knows, and the whole of the federal establishment know it, that at no point was Gowon in charge of the East. The East took orders from me, and that was that. Now, how could Gowon release Awolowo, who was in Calabar?
Yeah.
He came in because of the fact that I released him. We created quite a lot of rapport between Awolowo and myself. And I know that before he went back to Ekene, I set up a hotline between Ekene and my bedroom even in Enugu. He tried like an elder statesman and to find a solution. Awolowo is a funny one because don't forget that the Ife coup that began all the political purpose was to hand power over to Awolowo. And then finally, we all young men respected him a great deal. He was a hero. I thought he was a hero, and certainly I received him when I was governor. We talked, and he was very vehement when he saw our complaints, and said that if the Igbos are forced out by Nigeria, that he would take the Yorubas out also. I don't see what anybody makes of that statement. It's simple. Whether he did or didn't, it's too late. There's nothing you can do about it.
He confirmed they had a respectful relationship and acknowledged the story about Awolowo saying the West would also leave if the East was pushed out.
Did he confirm Awolowo actually said it?
He seemed pragmatic about it, said whether Awolowo actually said it or not, it's history now. People took different paths, they had different strategies, different perspectives ultimately.
Okay, that clarifies his position on that historical point. Finally, they asked him the big one. How does it feel to be seen as a world historical figure?
His response was quite modest, but also very insightful, I thought.
I don't know whether I am or not, but certainly I do know this, that I am probably the most Nigerian of Nigerians alive today. I also know that the failure of Nigeria has created a reflex, and that reflex can be called Biafra. I know that in the context of the Biafra that existed, I am very important. Having said that, then I feel that I have a responsibility to point out the deficiencies always of Nigeria and to keep alive the alternative. That's why I say there will always be, if not the Biafra of territory, Biafra of the heart.
He didn't claim the title. Instead, he said something like, I don't know about that, but I am probably the most Nigerian of Nigerians alive today.
That's a fascinating statement. What did he mean by that?
He explained that, in his view, the reflex of Biafra only happened because Nigeria itself had failed. So he saw his own significance tied directly to Biafra, which in turn was a consequence of Nigeria's problems. He felt a duty, it seems, to keep pointing out those problems, to keep the alternative alive in people's minds.
And this is where he brought in that concept of the Biafra of the heart.
Exactly. He elaborated on that, said it's not about geography, it's an attitude, a kind of revolution against corruption, against injustice. It represents everyone who wants to change things for the better in Nigeria.
And he was proud to be one of them.
Very much so. He identified strongly with that ongoing desire for a better way.
Wow. Okay, so looking back at this whole deep dive into that interview,
Yeah.
what are the main things that stand out?
Well, I think what's really striking is the consistency in Ojukwu's critique of Nigeria's structure and governance, right from 1969 through to when this interview presumably took place much later. His views on Biafra, self-determination, leadership, how history is written, it all provides this really valuable lens for looking at Nigeria's ongoing struggles. A key insight, maybe, is just how deep-seated some of these disagreements about the fundamental nature of the federation really are.
Yeah, it's incredible how many issues he flagged. National unity, resource control, what democracy even means in practice, the search for leadership. They're still front and center today, aren't they?
They really are, and maybe the most provocative thought to leave people with is that final idea he shared. The Biafra of the heart, this notion that it's not a place on a map, but a set of values wanting justice, good government, fairness, an aspiration for a better Nigeria that lives in people's minds and spirits.
A yearning for something different, something better, that goes beyond borders.
Exactly, a desire for equity, progress, real inclusion. So the question for you, the listener, is, what does that idea, that Biafra of the heart, mean today in our current context? Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it sparks further thought and encourages everyone to keep exploring the rich, complex, and absolutely fascinating history and identity of Nigeria.